Okay, I'm gonna talk about failure, specifically failure in business. And the reason I'm doing that is because today I have had what I would class as my fifth company fail. And that's quite difficult because I have to accept that I've had another failure, and I have to accept all of the reasons why it's gone wrong, and I have to take all of that on board and just park a second all of the learning and all of the things that we've achieved in that. I still have to take on and accept the failure. So there's a huge challenge in all of that, and there's a huge thing about having to look inside and work that out with yourself as to how you can move forwards off that. And it's really difficult, I think, for an entrepreneur, because it just, all that failure does is fuel that imposter syndrome that we all have about, God, am I enough? Christ, can I actually do this? Do I really know what I'm doing? Have I just got a little bit lucky in here? So it fuels that, which is a dangerous place to be, and it really messes with your head. But I'm going to run through them quickly, these 5 failures. I'm going to try and spin it into a positive as best as I can. So I would classify, or I would class my first business, my selling kickers key rings at Glastonbury, as a business failure. So I'm going to include that one. I would include my first proper company, so Step Success, as a business failure. That was a huge, huge failure, and in fact, it left me with £83,000 worth of debt and took years to recover from. I'm going to include our event company as a failure because it started and worked, and I never really built the business model, despite doing it in different ways, to get it moving. The vision I had for it never achieved that. I'm going to include Gloucester Prison, which is a tourist attraction that we opened, which I never wanted to open. It was kind of forced upon me, but we did it. We ran it for a year and a half. And I would definitely say that was a failure, not necessarily because it didn't work, because it never should have been opened in the first place. And I'm going to include the one that I closed down today, which was effectively the media company, so 50mm Media, which is where I'm sat in this studio. And that was something that was born out the back of COVID. When COVID hit, there was lots of free time, there was lots of spare time, there was lots of what am I going to do? And as an entrepreneur, because my tourism business was closed, I was like, well, what am I going to do? So I started coming up with different ideas, and I came up with this concept for 50mm Media. And in 2020, it was I would say revolutionary, but nobody else was really doing it, and nobody else was doing it in the way that I was going to do it. And therefore, it was completely new into the market. It had a really sweet spot in that world, and podcasting was just starting to kind of get some real traction. I was like, there's something here. And the market and the model was strong. Came out the back of COVID, and obviously went back into our tourism business and never got 50mm moving. Here we are 6 years later, effectively, and it's just not gone anywhere. So what we're left with is a dormant company, effectively, or a company that just doesn't trade. We're left with a bank account that doesn't really do anything, and we're left with just nothing that's actually happening. And it just becomes this bit of a weight, because it doesn't cost a huge amount every year to keep it running or to keep it live. But it sits there going, are we ever going to do anything with this? It just sits there as an idea that has passed by. You couldn't create Facebook now, like you wouldn't create now an iPhone, because it's already there. So what 50mm Media is exists in the market already. So I could try and compete with it, but that would be silly. Partially because I think we'd have to really work hard to penetrate the market. But secondly, my entire mindset, the way I work, is all about finding space. And I'm not about creating something that already exists with tons of competitors. I like white space, and that's where I thrive the best. The reason why this one, for me, is so important and so poignant is because it's my fifth. And I think entrepreneurs have 5 failures within them before they hit what we would class as success. And the reason I say that is because the amounts of businesses, the stats that show business failure in the first year, I think it's like 20% of businesses will fail in the first year. And in the first 5 years, that then scales by another 30 to 50%. So what you end up having is about 70% of businesses fail in their first 5 years. So only 30% actually make it. 10 companies, 5 years later, only 3 are still going. And then what happens with entrepreneurs is you have that failure and you come up with the next thing, and you start again and the next thing. So I think on average, your failure rate is about 20%, which means that in order to get to a success, you're going to have that 20% each time. So you have your first failure at 20, your second at 20, your 40, 60, 80, and then you hit your 100%. And that's where I think your 5 failures come in. So as an entrepreneur, I think that having 5 failures behind you is probably a sweet spot to position yourself for the next successful piece. I'm trying to find the positive in this failure, because when all else is said and done, and you could take all the positives away with it, the bottom line for me is I had a vision of where this company could go, and it hasn't transpired, it hasn't happened. So everything else to me is just noise, because ultimately I had a vision and I haven't achieved it. That for me is a failure, and everything else is just noise. And I have to deal with that, and I have to figure out how I overcome that and how I don't let that eat into my imposter syndrome, strengthening that piece, and how I bounce back so the next time I have a vision, I can see it through and it doesn't become a failure. I hope that makes sense. It made sense as I said it, but whether it does or not. My name is Joel, and I'm an entrepreneur.